EGM was a multi-platform video game magazine that began in 1989 in the Illinois area.
The main goal of the magazine was to get the information to the readers first.
The people that bought our magazine were a little bit older. They had their own money.
EGM gave readers a special kind of assurance that the reviews were going to tell it like it is. The workload was intense. We're talking 70, 80, 90-hour weeks.
We weren't writers, we were gamers first, before writers, before layout artists, before copy editors, before any of that.
We were fresh out of high school. Most of us didn't have college.
EGM's unique qualities was partially because of how unprofessional they were in the publishing world.
I was like, wait, what? You got a job at EGM? So like you're moving to California? He's like, no, dude, they're in Lombard. Like they're like 2 blocks from my dad's house.
I remember a lot of times when we were literally racing to get to O'Hare and drop off our prints. Yes, another one in the books.
We were winging it.
There are so many games that we wouldn't even know were ever even in development if not for EGM being completely tenacious about going to the trade shows and just snapping pictures of every game there.
I had the camera, I took the pictures, I knew what had to be done.
Even if they had a no photograph sign on the booth, Ed was snapping photos of everything.
The review crew, I think, is maybe the best representation of what EGM's ethos was.
We spoke our mind and lost advertisements.
That's how the review crew was set up. It wasn't about pandering to the companies.
It drove Konami crazy. It drove Capcom crazy.
I think EGM proved that you could do this and still be a success.
And I always marked every game lower than the game itself just because it was on hardware that sucked so bad.
That's a thing that really happened.
Capcom's pulling their ads.
By the way, that's Steve Harris, you know, the publisher of EGM.
He was the guy. I mean, he made EGM.
All of a sudden he pulls us into a big meeting and, hey, guess what? I sold the company today and here's your new bosses.
I think that when it became corporate and driven by writers less than gamers, I think it lost a lot of its edge.
And there's really been nothing like that since then.
Wow, this is really deep stuff.
I love video games. Back in when the Atari 2600 came out, I just loved it. I played it. I became very passionate for it. I'd play it and play it and play it. So I got good at it, set some world records, won some contests, won the Star Master contest from Activision. They sent me to California, and I actually was in an episode of The Greatest American Hero. I handed Connie Selica a rose, and of course it didn't make production.
Boy, oh boy.
Our local newspaper up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, somebody was reviewing a game, and I looked at that and I said, I can do better than that. I wrote the editor of the Milwaukee Journal Green Sheet where it was published, explained what I did. And son of a gun, I had myself one of the first video game weekly columns in the nation called Video Adventures in Milwaukee Journal in the early 80s. That got me to the trade shows, I'd meet the companies, and it just snowballed, and it did very well. Then, at one Consumer Electronics show, I met this young kid. His name was Steve Harris. He said, I want to make a magazine. I hear you have a pretty good reputation. How can we work together on this?
Steve Harris is very much in the kind of businessman that sees an opportunity and tries.
This was back when he had his first publication called Electronic Game Player.
That was the predecessor to EGM. It was a 4-shot. There's only 4 issues, with number 2 being the rarest. I had a lot of the same feature articles and structure as early EGM.
He's probably 18 years old, and he was walking around in his white jumpsuit along with 3 of his other friends for the U.S. National Video Game Team.
Steve Harris was on the U.S. National Video Game Team before EGM was even conceived. I've been on the U.S. National Video Game Team since 1989. It was actually in a tips and tricks video, and that was a lot of fun.
You are challenged by both outer space warfare and also interior adventure scenes.
The U.S. National Video Game Team was a big part of the marketing for EGM in probably the first 12 to 18 issues.
U.S. National Video Game Team presents Electronic Gaming Monthly.
And that came out every couple of months or so. We would do that, and eventually it worked into monthly. Sendai Publishing, the name was picked because it's a Japanese name, a region up in northern Japan. And it was thought that you would get Japanese companies to advertise in a magazine with a Japanese parent company, whether it worked or not. And he got it going.
I got the job at EGM when I was 16, so really the only other experience I had was school. Some friends and I did a fanzine about video games, Elite Players Club. I was working for an electronics store, and my boss at the time needed my help at the 1989 CES. I connected with David White. I had a copy of Elite Players Club with me, and I gave it to him. From there, I got a job at FCI Helpline as a video game counselor.
Steve Harris, he ran the helpline for them.
I answered an ad that said, "Do you like to play video games?" I figured, sure, I like to play video games.
I was like, sign me up. I get to play video games all day and make money doing it? Sure.
So I started helping by answering telephones, and we had to take down names and put them into a database.
And then that opened the door to get into EGM.
What I ended up doing while I was there is I took their old little, I call it the Baby Mac, and I used a very rudimentary publishing app on there to create actual dungeon maps. And I just did this because it helped help us with the FCI helpline when people called in for Ultima. They saw that, and then that's when David left, that was my in. They were like, you have the skills we need to fill this role. So that's how I got in.
It's still to this day the most unusual interview I ever had, and not for the reasons you would think. It was Martin, they brought me into David White. We were talking about all the different things, and suddenly they got into this argument. Is this what am I getting into here?
We've noticed that there were some things lacking in a magazine, and that was there was no independent photography. You were using stock screenshots.
What set EGM apart was that Ed Semrad was a photographer.
Had all the latest Nikon cameras, lenses, accessories, full color darkroom. I was really, really into photography.
We didn't get images from PR companies or from publishers.
Not just a photographer, but someone obsessed with getting the best photographs of game screens possible.
I knew enough of the video technology back then to be able to take screenshots off of a television set without showing the raster line.
I feel that Ed's obsession with getting photographs of everything really colored the tone of the magazine, and ultimately I think set it apart from everybody else.
He was responsible for the maps, and he pieced these together with photographs.
I sat there and took individual screenshots of every screen. The one that sticks in my mind is Phantasy Star. They had an island, and there was maybe 200-300 individual screens. And then I'd take the film and print them as wallet-sized pictures. And then came the hard part. I would sit there with an X-Acto blade and a steel ruler and trim around each picture so that they would match up perfectly. Stuck tape underneath, carefully lined them up, and if everything worked, it looked like a real map. We're able to do scrolling shooting maps, and that was another thing which we were able to do to get more circulation.
A part of the reason we were able to scoop everyone, it was getting into the trade shows in Japan.
Because a lot of the games that came from Japan, where always came out way earlier than in America.
It was challenging. I'd go to Japan 4, 6 times a year, take pictures, bring them back. We'd run them in the magazine. I would have loved to have been able to send somebody, but I felt safer and more confident just going myself, getting the pictures, and it was brutal. Martin would come along, he would play the games, and I'd take the pictures.
I actually almost didn't graduate because I was going on trips to Japan.
The other advantage of me going, I was the representative of the magazine. You know, I was somebody they could speak to, show me what you have, we'll put you in the magazine for this. I could get things done rather than just sending, you know, somebody else there who can say, well, we'll try to do what we can, and then get to meet more people, and that would snowball also.
Thank you.
There always were exclusives at trade shows. Sometimes you had to get into special events. You had to know the right people. Literally, I don't want to seem strange about this, but literally everyone was just that difficult. Whether it was getting first pictures of the PlayStation, first pictures of the Mega CD. I was a dumb American who would just take pictures. And they'd say, no, 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 and, you know, they get the X, and someone would stand in front, and it's fine, I got my pictures, I'll just move on somewhere else. It's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask permission. That was the obsession. The thing was, if I miss a trade show, somebody else may not, and we won't have the first pictures.
There are titles in here almost every time that the only evidence we have of them ever existing was the photo that Ed took. I know for a fact this is the only image that exists of Championship Wrestling on the NES. Super NES version came out, NES one didn't.
Can we still take some pictures?
The cone. Gotta talk about the cone.
Figuring out the best way to photograph television screens and like trade show environments that had a lot of light noise. What he would do is he'd come up with hack together tech to get the best photographs he could.
Computer monitors, television sets, highly reflective. Yeah, you can get a picture, but you're going to have this big bright light shining off the TV, making it very, very difficult.
So Ed came up with this cone made of cardboard.
And the top part's cut off so that it's hollow, rectangular to fit a TV screen on the bottom, tapering down to a square where I can put my lens in. So we were able to get pictures that way, but we couldn't play the game. I got this cone sitting on this TV screen, and you know, they're saying I can't see the screen. So then, oh, yeah, okay. So then we cut a little U-shaped channel in there, flipped it up, then Martin could sit there, play the game.
Martin, get over here!
I had to like crouch down and look into the cone and play the game.
And there wouldn't be any light coming in, and I was able to take the pictures, and we just called it the Cone of Silence.
A lot of my friends were working in retail or working manual labor jobs, and here I was learning Photoshop and desktop publishing and skills that, you know, a college grad would have.
Quark Express, the document creation software, we had some of the very first copies. We taught these guys, I take it back, they taught us what the software would do.
We had Steve Harris, the publisher, Ed Simrad, the editor, David White was the associate publisher, and then there was myself and a handful of assistant editors, and copyright and advertising staff.
We were a very small team. So I did a lot of the same type of work as Martin did at the time, you know, reviews, fact files, that kind of thing.
Fact file, well, that's basically like you're not throwing your opinion into those. You're just going to, this is this game that's coming out soon. It's not out yet.
So it's recording the game, taking photos and screenshots, compiling them into Quark Express to make the layout for the magazine, literally creating backgrounds in Photoshop to try and like put in there.
It would be 1 to 4 pages or more.
You'd play it to completion, ideally, but at least as far as you could.
Basically, we had to do a lot of the layout and design.
And everybody was trained in Quark, Photoshop, and Illustrator, and then we used a program called Typestyler back in the day. My first official article was issue 6. I did Revenge of Shinobi.
The first thing I had to work on, where I did my first full spread, was Bart versus the Mutants. that was a lot of fun. A lot of secrets in that game.
You would complete the page, you'd give the optical disc to Ed, and then he would go over it and, you know, if it's okay, good. If it's not, make some changes.
And then review crew is when we let it all out and told the readers how we liked the game or disliked the game.
We wanted to have multiple reviewers.
Basically, the review crew was 3 or 4 sentences about the game that you just played extensively and a number score.
And having multiple reviewers, that was better than just having one person do a page on the game. That's just one person's viewpoint.
The review crew concept lifted directly from Weekly Famitsu in Japan.
David Siller was actually the one. He was Steve's ad coordinator. And he saw the 4-panel system in Famitsu and said, we have to do this in an American magazine.
Steve decided that, okay, we're going to have 4 of them also. So it was Steve, myself, Martin was there. And we also had our mystery reviewer. We had Sushi X.
The moniker of Sushi X was created by David Siller and it was based off of Taco X in Famitsu.
We didn't know Japanese or the culture or anything. We figured, okay, we want our own variation, and he would be Sushi X. Well, taco in Japanese does not mean what we thought it was, the Mexican food. Taco means tentacles. Wherever you're playing an arcade game, multi-armed player, super fast, I'm guessing, some spectacular player, and that's what it meant rather than the way we interpreted it. But by then we had our Sushi X and it just stuck.
I don't like to talk too much about Sushi X because to this day, people will still hit me up randomly on like social media and ask, who was Sushi X? Tell us who Sushi X is. Personally, I love keeping the mystery going. Most of the time, Sushi X was one person whom I'm not going to name.
It was originally David Siller who wrote the reviews for Sushi X. David moved on into development within the industry, and then Ken Williams took over the role as Sushi X.
Loved it. One of the nice things about being behind the scenes is nobody knows who you are. They can't. If you say something bad about a company's game because you don't like it, wasn't me. I don't know, what are you talking about? That was that mysterious Sushi X guy.
Not everybody would like every game because some like shooters, some like puzzle games, and that was just each person's philosophy. And as you read the magazine, you would know that, oh, this is Sushi X, he likes street fighting games.
I think the hardest part was really trying to sum up what you thought about the game in such a small space. You don't have a lot of room to talk about graphics or the sound or the hardware it's on or anything like that.
We're here to tell you if these games are good or not.
When we reviewed a game, we told it like it was.
You had to play a game through to the end if possible and get the real feel of the game.
I know they tell us that they played through every game, but there's no way. Like there's a chronology problem here where no way like 3 RPGs came out that month.
Well, I can only speak for myself on that one. I wanted to beat every game I reviewed.
I didn't, I can admit that. I couldn't get through 15 levels of a shooter. I was 40 years old then, and
as my responsibilities grew, I didn't have that kind of time or luxury. So I felt that at least getting to the maybe 2 or 3 hour mark was enough for a fair review.
You could probably almost knock out all the games within a couple of days.
In an hour, it's like, I get it. I don't think you're gonna surprise me.
But it had to be a production copy because we didn't want anything to change from what our review was, from what a game player would actually have.
We did have one other issue where there was a game for the 3DO. It was a fighting game, and for the life of me, I cannot...
Way of the Warrior?
Yeah, Way of the Warrior. I called them up and I said, we'd like to review this. Is this a reviewable copy? And they said, yes, it was. We reviewed it and trashed it. And then all of a sudden they came back and said, no, that wasn't a reviewable copy. So we decided, okay, we'll re-review it. And they sent us a new copy. It's basically the same game that we had trashed, and we trashed it again. That was the only time we ever re-reviewed a game.
If they didn't like it, they could say what they wanted. I wouldn't change it. If they gave it a 3, they gave it a 3.
I think my low score was a 3, and it was Total Recall on the NES.
And that caused some controversy.
There was some fallout, for being that honest.
We trashed games, companies pulled their ads.
Acclaim was very upset with us. They knew it was not a good game.
And what they said was, we don't like this review or whatever. And I would be like, well, you know, this is the way the game is. This is what they feel about it. I'm not going to be ashamed.
Total Recall got slammed pretty much the hardest of any of the games during my time there.
But they'd come back a couple months later because we were just that, a driving force in the industry and a place to advertise.
You had to be able to play whatever game they gave you, whether you liked it or not, and that was the hard part, especially with Game Boy games.
People remember Sushi X. You know, they remember that Sushi X was the fighting game guy and that he hated the Game Boy.
What's your deal with the Game Boy?
I hate it. It sucks, and you'll never convince me otherwise. There's something about the green on green and the blurriness and everything else. It makes my eyes bleed, and I can't play those games. I just can't. It really honestly hurt my eyes to play these games. I likened those games a lot to those little watch games that you could play, right? The little LCD watch games. That's what it felt like to me when I was playing those games. In fact, you could probably add 4 points to my score, to be honest, if it had played on better hardware. And in fact, if you played these same games on a Super NES converter to play your Game Boy games, you know, Super Game Boy, whatever, I like the games a lot better because it's not killing my eyes. It's not hurting me anymore. And I really feel like Nintendo, they milked that thing. I did everything I could to warn people away from it, but they didn't listen. They could have had color much sooner if they just listened and not bought that damn thing, but they did anyway. I actually have one that I will not turn on. And someday I'm gonna take that thing target practice shoot and just shoot that thing just because I hate that thing so much. I just hate it with a passion. And that's my own bias, and I admit that freely. And everybody who saw my scores knew that. I don't like it. I can't play your game on a potato. But I love the new Game Boys. I love them all. I've got all of them. The Game Boy SP is like my favorite system. I think of all of them. I love that little thing. It's so portable, it's smooth, it works exactly the way I would have wanted it to work.
Quartermann was another mysterious writer who wrote a column called Gaming Gossip, and it was little tidbits and little previews of things to come. No screenshots, just words.
Yeah, Quartermann's actually really interesting these days to go back to.
Quartermann was our publisher.
Written very obviously, in retrospect, by Steve Harris. And, you know, he sort of fed information by his moles.
There were a lot of sources. We had David Siller, who was out in California, and he had his ear to the ground there. He knew the game companies, he knew the production people.
There was so much good stuff in there.
I'd be getting him information from Japan. John would be getting other information.
Very much so.
He was the most well-connected person on our staff because he was the one that would be the liaison to the different publishers to get review copies in, preview copies in, talk about coverage and things like that. So he knew everybody.
Most of the companies kind of understood what we were. They either had to be really hush-hush about anything they had going on, or they just had to accept the fact that we're going to try and get it out there first.
We'd give Steve a whole list of things, and he would take them and turn them into his magic of Quartermann.
There's just wild stuff in there that you don't see anywhere else. Like, that is the only place, as far as I know, that information exists. Can we count that as legitimate information? It was a Quartermann gossip column? I don't know, but it's like, it's at least a starting point toward like investigating.
I don't know if anybody else picked up some of that after he moved on.
It was Chris Johnston.
On my first day at EGM in 1994, they handed me a couple of notes and said, hey, you want to write the Quartermann column? I thought, doesn't Quartermann write the Quartermann column? I guess part of it was good because I'd read so many gaming gossips in my time. I knew the voice of Quartermann. I knew how to write that. So it was no problem for me to just whip that out using notes that, like, Steve had basically like just given these pages of notes to Ed, and Ed was giving them to me.
Some of the stuff you put in Quartermann wasn't necessarily true because you needed to fill space, and it might have been wishful thinking sometimes.
There's probably a lot of garbage in Quartermann, but there's probably a lot of things that would turn out to be true if you dug into them that don't exist anywhere else but those columns.
But anytime you read his column, it was a fun read.
We had us, and we had Game Fan. You had Game Players, which is based out of another major company which publishes other magazines. You had Video Games and Computer Entertainment. And you had GamePro, which was published by another major company.
We knew about everybody else. We knew about GamePro.
Oh boy, that's a loaded question.
Yeah, I really just wanted to see what they had versus what we had. You know, like on the same month, I'd be like, okay, here's a January issue, here's ours. What do they have?
I really enjoyed Video Games and Computer Entertainment. I loved Nintendo Power as a kid. I wasn't a huge fan of GamePro.
Our major competitor that I looked at was GamePro. GamePro had a ton of money, they had good circulation, they could get their magazines out in quantity anywhere and everywhere.
GamePro seemed a little more family-oriented.
Sort of understood that GamePro was the kindest of the reviewers, was more enthusiastic, and was for a little bit for a younger audience than maybe EGM was.
I wouldn't say I didn't pay much attention to them, but it's not like they struck me as saying, this is who we were. They were just kind of an entity that was there.
We were after the hardcore gamers, the other magazines. They were after more of the younger generation who just didn't have that much of a passion for the video games.
I really think is that we were gamers first. We loved video games, and we played video games with all our heart. We were writers second.
You could tell just from the way layouts were done, the wording, even though it was very juvenile, and yeah, there were spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes.
We're not really journalists, but we like games, so here's all the games, just barfed out on a page for you.
We would laugh when they would make typos in their magazines. Like, the biggest one, the most egregious one ever, was when they did Streets of Rage 3 on the cover. It said Streets of Rage, but Streets had 3 E's in it.
They had forgotten to put an April Fool's joke in, and they said that was the joke. The typo on the cover is the joke, and of course, that was not the case. That was not meant to be a joke at all.
The idea that you would go out with a typo on the cover was sort of like inconceivable to us.
We were just learning. We were pioneering.
I wasn't too worried about GamePro because I thought it had a different audience.
GamePro seemed to evolve a little bit as time went on, where they seemed to be trying to hit an older audience. Their graphics seemed to change in the magazine.
What can you tell us about the GamePro Sucks controversy?
Ah, yes, GamePro Sucks.
It was an anagram that was in issue 21, I believe, in the Atari supplement, in the first paragraph on Cyberball.
So when I was doing the Cyberball layout, I think I had been working probably 48 hours at the time. It just kind of popped in my head at one time, what if I did this? This is just kind of fun. So I just started, laying out the sentences so that the first character of each sentence would spell out GamePro Sucks. Didn't think anything of it. I didn't even really tell anybody until it was after the fact. When somebody actually found it, I was like, ooh, crap.
There was a memo issued to the industry and apologized and everything, and said that the person who did it was let go.
Honestly, it got a laugh, I think, from everybody at the office. They were kind of laughing about it, even Steve did. And he might have been somewhat upset, but he was laughing too much to really do anything. So I think he made up some story that I got fired, but obviously I didn't.
summed up your thoughts of GamePro at the time, right? I mean,
I didn't write it.
It was a joke, you know. We never really thought GamePro actually legit sucked or anything. We were just like, they weren't us, so we were the best. We would tout as much jokingly among ourselves.
We actually liked GamePro. It was a fun rivalry kind of thing. So it was in fun. It wasn't like really a malicious thing.
It was always more of a friendly rivalry than anything else.
It was pretty much Sushi X being Sushi X.
The one I think that was more contentious was Die Hard Game Fan. There was some interesting things that happened with them.
Game Fan had a history with EGM. They started as advertising their stores, and then they became a competing magazine.
We actually had a good working relationship with Die Hard, the game company, when they were selling stuff there. And eventually Dave Halverson called us and he said, you know, I'm getting sick of these guys. I'm sick of dealing with them. Thinking about possibly joining you guys. So what do you guys do for, you know, like what's your workflow and stuff like that? It's like, oh yeah, well, you know, we do this, we're taking screenshots there. It's like, okay, yeah, we can work with you on that. So yeah, if you want to come over and be an editor with us, yeah, we use this type of card to take the screenshots. We use Quark Express and Photoshop and everything. It's like, okay, that's good. Yeah, we'll definitely talk more about that. And it was like silence for like a month. We're like, all right, I guess that's not gonna happen. And that's when suddenly thunk, Die Hard Game Fan showed up. And we're like, oh my goodness, you really did that, huh?
Game Fan, they were kind of like us pushing the envelope.
I always respected Game Fan for keeping up with us and having, in my opinion, they had better image quality. You know, I always wanted to know their secret.
Our two magazines, we both had the same philosophy. Get the information first. If ever there were problems or reasons that I'd be pulling out what little hair I had, is that they would be able to get the information at the same time. They ran on same short production schedules. Being an independent company, doing things their way, they can also cut corners. We had probably better circulation. That maybe gave us the drive to keep going, to do better and faster.
You know, every magazine sort of had a different approach, and I think for me, EGM's was my favorite back then, and as an historian now, I find EGM's to be the most valuable approach because they would report on weird garbage that nobody else would report on. Ed's obsession with getting photographs of everything really colored the tone of the magazine, and ultimately I think set it apart from everybody else.
Oh, the EGM April Fool's joke. This is a good one.
I wish I could take some credit for that. I can't.
Let's just say I was fooling around with Photoshop, learning how to use selection tools, and there were no layers back then. So I was just toying around with Castlevania and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and I made a spliced image. I'm like, hey, check this out. I'm like, let's do an April Fool's joke, you know, a fake code or whatever. And the Simon Belmont trick was our first April Fool's joke.
I would say if there's one person who really got into that, would be Ken Williams.
Ken was the guy who, he was in the corner and he was always hunched over working, and people would say, like, don't bother Ken, he'll kill you.
The one I'm most known for is the Shenlong trick in Street Fighter 2. That was kind of a by accident thing, and there was a collaborative effort that eventually went into that.
I would have to say when Street Fighter 2 became a thing, there was a lot of competition in the office.
I didn't play Street Fighter 2. Everybody in the office played Street Fighter 2. It was a phenomenon.
Ken Williams and Howard Grossman, probably two of the best players that I know.
It was one of those games that when I saw it first in the arcade and I saw the whole you must defeat Shenlong to stand a chance, at first I was like, who's this Shenlong? Just like everybody else, right? And I realized it was just a translation error. No big deal, just means Dragon Punch, got it, perfect. But that's not gonna stop me from playing to that fantasy and thinking in my head, I'm like, you know, we've been doing a lot of cutouts lately, and I'm like, what if we did this? What if we did this? And what if I actually made a real boss character?
He would say, hey man, I need your help. I'm trying to take the screenshot where these two guiles are flash kicking at the exact same time. And I know you're not gonna bother me with all the stupid questions about the game because you don't play it, so can you help me? I was like, yeah, sure, dude. I don't know how to play it. He's like, I'll show you. And I started to understand the appeal of the game.
Well, let's just create some fake animation. So I did a little screenshot, changed a little coloring on it and like that. I think I just started busting out laughing. So then we all kind of like threw some ideas into the gear.
And I remembered that Vega, or M. Bison, if you prefer the American name, had his Fierce Punch had like one frame of animation where it had like a flame on it. Wouldn't it be cool if you took that flame off of cut that off and added it, like his Dragon Punch has flames on it. And he's like, oh, that's awesome, and then he put that on there.
It was just for fun. It was purely for fun. And then it just so happened it was April Fool's month. And we hadn't come up with a trick. And we're like, look, this will be perfect for this. It was really long and convoluted, and we didn't think anybody would take it seriously, but we had to do it to where it sounded like you could. Probably the best thing to this whole thing was that the actual contest was on the page of the trick. And that was like, it was like, it's so dumb. There's no way they'd fall for it. But yes, so many people did. I think it really came home when we saw Japanese magazines or Chinese magazines. They copied the trick as if it was real. And we were like, yes.
You get letters.
People who said, I actually did this and it didn't work.
I did get a lot of angry letters that came like straight to me just because it was in my section too. Like, how dare you? I went through so many quarters.
It just became like a viral sensation like before the internet. Like it went nuts.
Well, how do I do this? It was in EGM, it's gotta be real.
Somebody came in one day where they're like, dude, you have to hear Capcom's voicemail. So they picked up the phone and put it on speakerphone, the office phone, and dialed up Capcom. Hello, thank you for calling Capcom USA. If you're inquiring about the Shenglong code, please call EGM at blah, blah, blah.
That was just another reason for them to really get mad at us.
We were just like, yes, we hit the big time, dude. Even Capcom's voicemail they hate us, it's great.
It was the best pulling the wool over the industry's eyes that we've ever seen. When we thought it couldn't get any better, then Akuma came around. And then we're like, that's the guy, that's the Shenglong, that's him, he's right there. They liked it so much they created a character behind it. They'll never admit it, but you know it is. It's one of those unspoken things.
An undeniable mark on pop culture, man. It's crazy. To this day, I joke with everyone. Every time we're playing Street Fighter 2 and somebody picks Ken and does that flaming Dragon Punch, I'm like, that's me.
Because I was goofing around with Photoshop, we pretty much invented the April Fool's joke in EGM. Making the deadlines was probably the most challenging part of the whole job because it was grueling. As we launched sister magazines,
Sendai had EGM, and then they start spinning off. They have a magazine that's just about Sega games called Mega Play. Super NES Buyer's Guide starts in like 91 or something like that.
There was a Turbo Force one that I actually worked with. I was like one of the few people on there, the staff who actually loved TurboGrafx.
In 92, I think it is, they bring back Electronic Games, the 80s magazine, but rebranded as a Sendai publication. Computer Game Review starts in like 92, which is PC game focused.
Super Gaming, the international magazine.
Like 94, EGM2 starts.
Japan was always our influence. It was the Famitsu magazine. And they'd be out bi-weekly. And Steve would often say, if only we could go out and be bi-weekly. We could make it every 2 weeks, but on the downside, that means EGM is out only for 2 weeks. Okay, let's just make a second magazine. Oh, what do we call it? Well, finally settled on EGM2. Each magazine would stay on the shelf for a full month because you're not replacing one with a newer one. It's a whole different magazine.
And I think at one point you have at least 6 Sendai monthly or bi-monthly video game magazines happening on top of like annual specials. Sendai's like flooding the market.
I worked on all of those at the same time in a given month.
Well, we can just see if we can get more profits. Yeah, but we'll just have, same people, double the work. And that's when it started to get a little bit stressful.
So we just kept doing it. So we went right from one to the other to the other.
Okay, EGM's done. Oh, Mega Play's deadline is now.
But we were super proud of the work that we put out.
2 weeks EGM, 2 weeks EGM2, and then in somewhere in between we had to do Mega Play, SNES Buyer's Guide, and all the other like special stuff that we did. that was killing us.
If you did a fact file for EGM, they would say, okay, now we need a page for Super NES Buyer's Guide. So you would take that fact file, you would change the colors of the background a little bit, you would move some of the pictures around, and you would change where it says Electronic Gaming Monthly on the bottom to Super NES Buyer's Guide, and then that was a page in Super NES Buyer's Guide.
Things got kind of messy when like all of those were going on.
There was actually a point where we were literally debating on talking about doing a walkout. We are dying here. Steve Harrison had to interfere and eventually said, okay, we are splitting the staffs. I had to tell Ed, we are splitting the staffs.
I ran it for a while, but at a point, it just got to, I said no.
I think Ed was just very reluctant to split the staffs because I think he just didn't want to release control of it.
Steve and I said, let's give it to Howard, and Howard became the editor of EGM2. We then had 2 staffs, and each one would be doing their own work independently, and we, in effect, became bi-weekly.
On our staff of EGM2, there was some angst against some of the EGMers, but definitely we all got along.
We always would go back and forth. He wants to run it first on EGM2, and I'd say, no, EGM's the big seller.
No, it's actually okay. It's not gonna they're not gonna take away from EGM or anything like that. When we would create all these, try to do these like inserts and beautiful things for EGM2, they would just eventually take those ideas and put them into EGM. And we were getting like really frustrated with that.
That's where we get our circulation, we'd hold it off for EGM.
So eventually we just kind of stuck to doing strategy guides and kept at that and trying not to do too many of the like ideas that we wanted because we knew they would get stolen and put in EGM. Nothing against the EGM staff, this was actually more higher up above them, so it's not against Dan Shu.
I can't speak for the other magazines if they felt a certain way.
I don't know if it was too much, because I mean, they were only putting out what the advertising supported, and I think EGM was quick to chop a magazine if it didn't work. Super Gaming is an example. Super Gaming was EGM's attempt at a magazine that only covered Japanese import games. What American game publisher is going to advertise in a magazine that only shows Japanese import games?
It didn't last very long, and we only did 4 of those.
They certainly overextended their staff, but maybe not the product.
Surprisingly, it's a rather unstructured environment. We didn't have to get anything done until one deadline at the end of the month. So it's up to you and all these irresponsible young guys trying to figure out, okay, well, I got to do this. I got to play this game. I got to write this article, but I have 3 more weeks to get this done. So things are going to start going off the rails pretty fast.
Yeah. Sometimes there were laser tag fights and Nerf guns. Things would come out of drawers and get thrown across the room. And
we would play this game called Decapitato. The idea would be you get on one or the other side of the hallway and then whip this frisbee thing down the hall and try to decapitate the people. There were a lot of marks on the walls, a lot of dents in the cabinets and things like that.
If you just walked into the office and you just listened for a moment, you would just hear the sounds of games going on.
And the biggest problem, I think, is when great video games start coming in, especially multiplayer ones, then that's a complete distraction for everyone involved. This happened with Soul Calibur, this happened with Street Fighter games, Mario Karts, anything that's very competitive. Halo was terrible for us.
16-player Halo on deadline.
All of a sudden you realize, I just spent the last 2 hours playing Halo and not doing other work, and then you're behind.
Yeah, I think a lot of readers of EGM probably imagined that working EGM was like a dream job. Yeah, like that you could sit in the office and play video games all day, the games that weren't even going to be out for like 3 months.
We took kids out of high school, but they could play games. These guys their unbelievable reflexes.
We're all on equal playing grounds because this is a new game to all of us. So the competitions were incredible because you're facing off against people who are learning and scaling up and leveling up at the same time.
They go out to arcades and movies and stuff like that all the time.
Yeah, we did have to kind of just blow off steam every once in a while.
And you get to, I don't know, hang out with Sushi X or whatever.
Some of the things that these guys would do, and I say these guys because I almost never was involved in it, the things they would do to blow off steam was just hysterical and sometimes annoying. I'm talking about you, Ray.
Every hour, Ken's Mac would play the boss theme from Streets of Rage.
I didn't goof around a lot at the office. I just kind of sat in my little corner. People left me alone because they thought I was evil and mad all the time because I have a resting bitch face.
The reality was it was way more work than I expected. And I don't know why I thought, and probably a lot of us had it in our heads, that someone else handled all the business and we would just play the games. But it was a wake-up call. It was a pretty fast wake-up call.
The hours can get a little long, so they do kind of crush your own non-work life a little bit.
We didn't have any work hours. Never could even imagine saying, okay, we're working 9 to 5. It was a full day. After that, then we'd get back in, start playing the games, do the reviews. It was hectic. Midnight to 6 a.m. would just disappear because we're sitting there playing the games.
We were putting together, sometimes up to a 300-page magazine every month, and there's a lot of work that goes into that.
There's definitely some painful nights where I remember working till 2, 3 in the morning. It was easier just to sleep under the desk for a few hours than wake up at 7, 8 a.m. to start working again because the deadline was approaching and you had no choice.
That's just the way they were. They knew they had to get the work done and they enjoyed what they were doing. I know they really liked what they were doing.
It didn't feel like work. That was the part of the fantasy that still was true.
We gave them a good salary. They loved what they did. They worked whatever hours were necessary because they knew what the product had to be. They wanted to be the best.
Like every day I couldn't wait to get up and go to work. I never had to drag myself out of bed.
There were a lot of opportunities and stuff that I think we missed. As a group, we all went through a lot of challenges in life just because we let work kind of take over. Work became our life. And we kind of all grew up together too. So it was kind of like a little mini family.
I cared a lot about them and they all were very devoted. The one thing which I was very, very worried about, I wanted them to make something of themselves. You can't count on this forever. And some went out and they're running IT departments. They're doing very well. I wish the best for everybody and hopefully everybody's out doing what they love.
In '96, EGM gets sold to Ziff Davis Media, and Ziff Davis takes over editorial on it.
I had heard a rumor that Steve was looking to sell the company, and I went to him and I said, hearing this rumor that you're looking to sell, is there any truth to this? No, don't worry about it. It's just rumors. Don't worry about it.
Nobody knew that the sale was coming.
Okay, I keep hearing the same rumors. Steve, you sure there's nothing going on? Nothing's going on.
I still remember the very day where I walked in and I knew something was up because everybody was congregated in one area talking and Ed Semrad was there talking with them. And he was talking as if he was one of the people. This is very unusual for Ed. And right there I knew something was up, something was different.
Steve was the boss. He knew what the financials were.
I'm just thinking, why would you sell off something that's your baby like that? I didn't understand the concept behind it. It's like, were we not making money? Or is it just you wanted to make more money? You wanted to do something different? It was just very sudden. It was very hard,
We all knew it had to happen sometime. He was just one person running a huge magazine.
I think he just wanted to just make a ton of money, just go and do something else with it.
Well, we were all kind of frightened that we would, that everything would change into a corporate environment.
And then they brought several of the people in to talk to us about the magazine. They were actually very courteous at the time. It was John Lane and a couple other people.
They come in, hey, don't worry, everybody's gonna keep their job, everything's gonna be exactly the same, we're just gonna take over and you guys are gonna be great, everything's gonna be fine.
For a while, you still see the same names from old EGM.
They had to keep us employed to a certain amount. That was part of the contract.
As that transition sort of keeps happening, you start seeing some of the older names getting replaced by newer people.
It didn't really impact us that much in the beginning. It just felt like, okay, it was very much business as usual. There was no no corporate entities or suits that would come in and say, now you have to start doing this and this.
Based on the stories that I heard, I think the real transition when Ziff Davis bought Sendai was a professional work environment. as professional as it could be with a bunch of 20-something idiots.
During the Senate years, it was like very much hobbled together.
The stories I was hearing about the Lombard office, it was like a shanty town. Chris Johnston used to talk about, I think the desk he sat at was a door on top of 2 filing cabinets.
I didn't have a computer at all for the first couple months.
We're sharing these external drives to transfer files around because there weren't enough to go around. We did notice after some time more money coming in to help support us, like our computers were getting better.
We now are getting into a company that's more a part of a larger company type format, where it's like a GamePro, it's like a Game Players, it's like a vg&ce. I sat down with John Lane, we talked. What I understand is that they went out to introduce themselves to all of the game companies. Hey, we just bought the magazine. What do you think of this, this, and this? Well,
they gave me a pretty glowing review. John's really good. He keeps up with things. When they started asking about Ed, it was kind of a mixed bag. You know, some people liked him, some people didn't. But that's to be expected when you're in a position the way he was, having to keep up with all the information and run things when they maybe didn't want you to.
It's quite possible that not everybody spoke favorably of me. We talked about it, and hey, it's business. So they found an editor. Didn't he come from England? He became the editor-in-chief, and I became a chief correspondent, which still gave me a lot of things to do. I had all the international travel in that, and even more. And after that, I said, okay, that's it. I went back to technical writing. I worked for Abbott Labs.
And then about a year later, they decided that for the amount of work I was doing and the salary I was making, they could spread it around a little bit differently, and they decided that it was time for me to part ways.
When he left, that struck a huge chord with me. Yeah, I'm now the eldest employee. Now I'm the legacy? I'm the one holding the torch?
I think it lost that spark that it had in the old days. I don't know how much of that is actually Ziff Davis' fault. I suspect that it's more that the landscape of how we talked about games was changing, even back then, even 96. 95, 96, you have magazines like Next Generation coming out that are taking a much more serious approach to reporting on video games. I think the Ziff Davis acquisition changed EGM in fundamental ways, and it maybe lost its voice for a little while, but then it gained a new voice. I think that once EGM found its new voice, it found a new audience, and is also worth remembering and examining just as a different publication.
Ziff Davis eventually moved us to a nicer office with proper cubicles.
By the time I got there, we were at the office in Oak Brook, and it was much more professional. It was all set cubicles. The 3 magazines were in very specific places.
Even there were times where we would do things that might kind of destroy things around the office or put holes in walls. It didn't feel like that was a big deal in the Senate days because things were such a mess.
This is real, like we're professional now.
So there was actually 2 moves.
About a year later, they announced that they were shutting down that office and moving all of us to California, to the San Francisco offices.
They set this ominous company-wide meeting one morning without any warning of what it was going to be. So a lot of us went in there thinking we were going to get fired. And then they stood up there in front of us and said, no, we're moving to San Francisco. We're moving the whole office to San Francisco.
And that was awesome and rough at the same time because you're asking people to uproot. A lot of the people with families or who grew up around the area could not make it.
So that made it less exciting. I'm a little biased here, but I feel like the team we had at EGM in the early 2000s was, we were killing it. It was such a perfectly balanced team. We worked together so well. We all got along together so well.
If you agreed to go, they were gonna pay for all your moving expenses and help you get a place and all of that. So I jumped at that chance. I thought it was great.
First few months of that were hell. So at this point, I was the editor-in-chief of the magazine, and I had to kind of keep my shit together to keep the magazine together.
Now, when we got out to San Francisco, we ended up doing a few hires that you know, really worked out. I mean, Brian Intihar was a hire when we moved out there. Shane Bettenhausen was a hire when we moved out there. So, I mean, you know, we got back up to speed pretty fast.
Luckily, I hired Jennifer Sal, who was an amazing managing editor. She had experience. She used to work at Next Gen magazine. So she was able to walk right into this and kind of help get things done for us.
And that idea of we're going to get all this work done in a 9-to-5 space, or as close to it as we can, was an extremely positive change. That was a big push from Dan Shu. We somehow did it. We changed this magazine where it was like, yeah, everybody kind of lived and breathed and slept the magazine, and we changed it into a much more 9-to-5 centric job, and it was great to be part of that.
In my opinion, and maybe this is the opinion of many people, once it went corporate, it just didn't have the soul of when it was Sendai Publications.
He was, I forget, the editorial director of the whole thing at that time. He said he wanted EGM to become the Rolling Stones of video games. I'm like, no, just let EGM focus on the gaming and stuff.
I think the whole tone of the magazine changed at that point.
I think back to the infamous review. The review was literally just another karate game, was the entire review. That sort of thing would never happen in our era of EGM.
That was one thing we liked in EGM too. We had creative control because they didn't care about us. And by they, I mean Ziff Davis. But eventually they started getting more in control because they didn't like the idea that our magazine was actually taking sale numbers away.
The name even changed to Expert Gamer, and then Expert Gamer became kind of its own thing where it was more the tricks and strategies.
There was another one, I won't name a name, it was an art director. He became an art director in EGM2. I remember he showed me an image, 2 pieces of art, and he showed me, it was an image of Fulgore from Killer Instinct and Ken from Street Fighter 2, and he looked at me and goes, hey, Mike, which one of these is Street Fighter? Are you serious? I'm like, I remember that was a key moment, like, why are you here?
It was nice to be out on the West Coast. San Francisco is a beautiful city, so it was cool to live there to begin with. But it was nice to be there and know, like, you could hop a train and go to Electronic Arts and interview the developers of The Sims. Like, that was really big around the time that we got out there.
The layout changed, so it wasn't so screenshot oriented or map oriented.
The real test was when the PlayStation 2 came out. It didn't play well with our capture cards. If you go and look at the early issues of PlayStation 2 coverage, the screenshots are awful. I mean, they're just terrible. When we got into that generation of consoles, we really started pushing for official shots from the publishers.
They would get company-fed screens. I didn't like that. And again, this is why I'm like, what good are you? That's monkey work. Anybody can do that. You know, literally anyone can do that. I want to do something that becomes me. You know, I want to put me on the page with what I'm doing.
I mean, for better or worse, you know, it made the games look a lot better, but a lot of them were also staged perfectly, so it made the game maybe look even a little bit too good.
We would play the same levels over and over again to get the best possible shot we could possibly get. Even though we could get the quality up as high as terms of like the crispness and the colors, we would try to get the action shots as best as we could, and I think it showed.
More and more companies didn't want us doing that because for that exact reason, it's like they don't always look the greatest, and they're not a kind of posed shot that the companies can control and do better. So more and more companies would like, well, we'll provide you the assets and we ask you not to take screenshots.
It's lazy.
When I got an issue of EGM, because I'm like, oh, this is like one of the first issues of EGM I haven't seen where I wasn't working there. And I was like looking in the magazine because I wanted to see how Resident Evil 0 was. And I looked at the review and there were like 3 massive screenshots of spoilers there. I'm like, close it. I'm like, why? Why?
And I've seen the magazine, I flip through it, I'm like, I don't care about this. There's nothing in here that's wowing me. It's not, I don't know, it didn't have the same passion. It was very generic to me.
Down the road, Shu managed to kind of take back a little bit more control and have a little bit more journalism in there. And I was kind of pleased to see that with Shu, but I think that developed over time.
The key that made everything possible, I gave this a lot of thought, is the fact that there was, in the late 80s, early 90s, There was not an internet. It was out there, but there wasn't the network that you have now, where if there's a trade show, you get a live feed from Tokyo and everybody knows what it is as it's being done. And that's where we came in and we filled that gap.
We had the website that started coming up, the Nuke website, nuke.com. So I worked a lot on that.
So Nuke I never saw, but Nuke was EGM's website in, God, I think like 95 it might have even started. It was really early.
We didn't do a whole lot with it, but it was one of the first ones out there. There weren't a lot of websites at the time, and they were all very simplistic, not like today's websites. It was like a EGM light, so to speak, not nearly as graphical as EGM was.
If you produced a game on let's say PlayStation and Saturn, maybe we do the PlayStation version in the magazine and the Saturn version would get done on Nuke. Or Nintendo or Genesis, Super Nintendo or Genesis, something like that.
This is very Steve Harris. I think that he saw that the internet was going to be where people started talking about video games, and I think, I suspect that Nuke.com was probably one of the earliest experiments in delivering video game news as quickly as possible to internet users.
I'm picturing the layouts in my head and I'm cringing just thinking about them just because they were so simple. It was just like screenshot, text, screenshot, text. I spent a lot of time in the chat, and that was probably my most fun part about the Nuke. The site, the chat was cool because I actually got to talk to people. Because I was the admin, the admin for the chat, so I would be booting people out and talking to them and keeping them engaged and just things like that behind the scenes.
But I think Nuke died before the Internet Archive existed to archive it. So I don't think there's any remnants of Nuke other than like the advertisements in EGM. It just shows how much they were just like trying everything they could.
We didn't want to bite into the actual magazine itself, so you didn't really get anything new out of it. It was just complimentary. And then when Ziff Davis came on board, a lot of that stuff changed because they didn't want the Nuke site. They had their own site that they wanted to do. So GameSpot.
Inevitably, magazines were not going to do great in this internet age. There's just physical media was just going to be a bygone thing. Like a lot of our editorial direction was, hey, let's be entertaining. Let's be smart about our analysis. Let's be very original in our features.
Then we started doing something called Afterthoughts, which was a series of interviews talking with the developers after the game came out.
We spend months or years hyping up a game like, say, Metal Gear Solid 2, right? And it comes out and then we don't talk about it ever again. So it's like, why aren't we revisiting these hot games a couple months later and talking to the developers and getting some insight into what went into the creation of this stuff?
So now they're going to be able to tell me, well, what is the deal with this bit in the ending? Like, I don't understand that, or like, why did you do this with the narrative, or like the questions you couldn't print in the preview period. And that was really fun. I got to interview Dennis Dyack for Eternal Darkness, a game that I really love.
Then we would do things like Sean Baby. He was one of the writers that Crispin found to do an article, this feature article, like the 20th worst games in video game history. And I remember reading this and I was just laughing my head off. This was before it went to print. I was like editing it. I'm like, oh my God, I've never seen anything like this. So before we even printed this article, before it published, I told Crispin, hey, put me in touch with this guy. Let's lock him down. Let's get him to do a monthly conference. We need this in every issue of EGM, not just this one-time feature. So at that time, John Davison was the editorial director, so he was my boss. So I told him, I'm like, hey, I think I want to kill the trick section. And it was pretty bold because this is Trickman Terry has been doing the trick section for many, many years. He's a very core part of that magazine, but I'm like, in this internet age, I don't think people are waiting a month and a half for tricks that are now slightly out of date when they could find this stuff on a GameFAQs or other sites like that.
Yeah, it really kind of, it would eventually negate the reason for my section. Found it here already, so you didn't really need to have it, have a magazine tell you what to do.
Especially in the latter half of the 90s when games got a little bit more cinematic and focused a little bit more on maturing the art form. I don't think that the code for infinite lives was as relevant anymore. As video games evolved, I think that they evolved away from the EGM approach of here's all the games and here's whether they're cool, and here's how to get all the tips for them. You know, and I think that that approach just stopped making sense.
The internet was getting bigger, and you know, we were on a 4-week lead time, and stories were being broken on the internet in the matter of hours.
I remember it was Star Wars: The Masters of Terraskazi. That we were gonna get an exclusive on that one. I was actually editing the screenshots for them, and we had to deliberately overlap them because we were worried IGN was gonna steal them and just scan them and immediately put them online. When our magazine came out, they did that anyways. They just cropped out all our images and they just stuck them online.
You can't compete with the internet. Like, the internet's always gonna be first.
It was easy to see the writing on the wall. You weren't going to be cutting edge in print at that point.
I guess I didn't really realize at the time that it was going to be that way, but I guess in retrospect, it's easy to see where, yeah, we weren't going to last very much longer.
I think that EGM stood out from the competitors, not because the competitors didn't care about games, but like because it came from that place of like people who play games all the time, who like nerd out about it and just talk about it all the time. And I think that that way of talking about video games was sort of the seed of how we started talking about video games on the internet.
Meeting up with Steve, it was like a lifelong dream. You know, I was able to take that passion and apply it to something and make it productive. And now, looking back, seeing that, I think it came out pretty good.
I'm constantly running to gamers, game industry people. Every new job I get in the games industry, like I worked at PlayStation, Riot, Blizzard, and at all these places I've had people come to me like, oh, hey, I want to meet you, or I want to say hi, or I want to thank you for EGM. So that's been fantastic just to see how many people EGM has touched over the years.
You can't Google these very specific niche parts of video game history, and the only way we know about them at all is because they were in these print magazines.
That's what these game magazines feel like. It feels like history. It's a piece of history.
We were just a bunch of kids, and kids making a magazine that captivated hundreds of thousands of people, and we were able to pull it off and do it. It's a hugely complicated process.
I mean, I learned about so many different things that I never would have heard of from EGM. Like, I learned about like the Conix multi-system, or even the TurboGrafx 16. I wouldn't have known much about that if it wasn't for EGM covering it.
I have talked to several people that are now in their mid-30s who have said, oh yeah, I remember EGM. Yeah, I used to read it all the time. So I'm beginning to get a more sense of the impact that it had. But at the time, I just knew we were creating a really good product, and they told me that it sold really well. Yeah, you don't really think about the impact until later on.
We were able to do what we wanted and in the way we wanted, and still influence not only players, but the industry in itself.
The far-reaching implication of that magazine was like, holy cow, man, it was just freaking incredible.
I still work in video games, and everything I do in my career is around video games, and that would not have happened if Joe Funk didn't give me a job all those years ago at EGM.
You know, some of the things that I did in EGM live on now, like the skeleton meme, and I wrote that caption. That was one of the very first things that I wrote at EGM, and now it's a meme, and I can buy it on a shirt. That just like blows my mind.
We knew that we were putting out a good product, and I feel proud of the fact that we did as much as we could.
It was the source. It was just one of the best sources that you could find to get all your gaming information, and you know, I was kind of proud to be part of that team.
It was a dream job for sure. I think it was surreal in a way.
And reading EGM is the reason why it was my dream job.
Mike Vallis and Terry Minnick and Ken and Martin and just all those guys, just lasting friendships. You know, I mean, that's what I really remember most about it. And it's great that I still, you know, I still talk to these guys all the time.
And of all the places I've worked, I've made the most forever friends from my times at EGM.
All my groomsmen at my wedding were ex-EGM alum.
I think the most special thing for me is that Steve and Ed gave me a chance. I was very young, and I had no formal design or writing experience, and I got to be a part of something very special that is loved by so many people around the world. For me, the whole experience is special, and I look back on those days with fond memories and nothing but positive energy.
And people are doing documentaries about it. It's like, what? It's like, I'm so gratified that like it's reached that far and lasted so long.
It just means a lot. What you guys are doing means a lot. So I want to thank you and your team for doing this, because this means a lot to me. And it means a lot.
You miss working in this industry?
Yes.
Do you feel it's central to who you are today?
Yeah.
We were just a crazy bunch of guys who loved games. It was just a great run.
M-I-K-E-V-A-L-L-A-S. Not like the video game Valis, which is V-A-L-I-S, which they often made fun of when I first started there.
I like that your name is the same as the game Valis on TurboGrafx.
And you did a little bit of writing for Game Players, did you not?
No.
You didn't? I swear I saw your name in Game Players.
Again, at this age, when was it in the time frame?
Like the earliest
Game
Game Players.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, maybe before you were an employee for Steve.
Thank you for saying that.
I'm a little camera shy at this point.
That's all right. That's all right.
There's a very large office. There was a very large desk with a very large black leather chair and a plaque on the desk that, I'm not making this up or embellishing this. It said Steve Harris, God Emperor of Sendai in gold. It was a gold plaque, and I'm not making that up. That was really on his desk. But you'd be like kind of scared, you know? You'd be like, is he gonna like touch me and turn me into ash?
He actually had a video game company a lot of people didn't know called Black Pearl Software. That was actually right down below us. That I think he tried to keep that quiet because he didn't want a conflict of interest in there. I think they did, forget the name of the game. Headphone Jack, I think it was called. Mohawk and Headphone Jack. Thank you.
So did you decide to put Bubsy on the cover?
That's a good point. Yeah, okay, I could always throw it upward saying, okay, Steve said, we're gonna do this.
But as a journalist, your responsibility is to the reader. It's not to the developer, it's not to the publisher, it's not to, the PR firm who's giving you the games for free.
Well, they had to institute a dress code at a certain point and tell people not to wear shorts because there's this one guy who was a heavier guy, and when he would sit down and he wore shorts and he would like spread his legs, his balls fell out of his shorts during meetings.
I remember hearing things like moving one of their couches into the elevator, and they're just riding up and down the elevator all day.
It was a buyer's guide where we said the company that had the worst games out there was THQ. And they greeted us at the next trade show with hello, and you can edit here. You can imagine what they said.
Is swearing okay, by the way?
Turn-based, you know, click menu, click this, do that. I want to kill stuff.
Scratch that. I should have prepared for this one.
Now, more importantly, I am thankful for the readers of EGM, because those are the people that matter the most. And the way that the community has reached out to me through social media and let me know that they still appreciate my work has been so awesome. And before I get too emotional, we're going to leave it at that.